When you hear the words comic book universe, you probably think of superheroes in skin-tight costumes shooting energy beams at bad guys. But today, I want to tell you about one that is radically different. But don't worry, there is still tons of leather and spandex. Romance and BDSM have been around comics since its very inception. Like Joe Shuster, one of the creators of Superman, drew a ton of bondage art, and Jack Kirby, the co-creator of basically every original Marvel character, literally created the first ever romance comic, which directly says on the front cover that it's designed for the more adult readers of comics. Following in their footsteps is Stjepan and Linda Sejic, and their shared universe that is unofficially called the Perverse, because it's all about sexy, well-drawn characters getting up to no good. But here's the thing, the sex is probably the least interesting aspect of these comics, because behind all of the kink and supernatural politics, these books have serious depth. They're thoughtful, character-driven, and emotional stories about connection, vulnerability, self-discovery, and finding your place in the world, even if that place is a BDSM dungeon or the underworld. If you're willing to go into these comics with an open mind, then I think that you'll be delightfully surprised at just how good they are. And to make things even better, all of these books can be legally read 100% free online. But listen, this video is obviously not for kids, and I'm going to have to censor plenty of these images to try and make it past YouTube's guidelines. If you want to see the uncensored version, then it is available on my Patreon completely for free right now with no pledge required. However, it is also pretty damn likely that regardless of how careful I am with censoring, YouTube is likely going to demonetize and restrict this video, which is why I want to give a big thank you to the sponsor, Adam and Eve, for making it possible in the first place. With them having been in business for over 50 years, I'm sure you know all about Adam and Eve by now. And if you don't, well, let me tell you that my wife has very much been a fan of our purchases. Adam and Eve is the most trusted name in the game with their 24/7 customer service and a 90-day no-hassle return policy. But by all means, if you are not currently in public and are wanting to make your partner's day, then feel free to take a look for yourself at adamandeve.com/Drake. And if you use my code Drake at checkout, then you will get 50% off of one item and free discreet shipping in the US and Canada with free rush processing, with some exclusions. Once again, I want to give a big thank you to Adam and Eve for ensuring that this video will make at least a little bit of money, and for being some of the nicest sponsors that I have ever dealt with behind the scenes. But now, let's get back to it. Stjepan and Linda are high school sweethearts and went to art school together, and pretty quickly, Stjepan made a name for himself in the indie comic scene as a prominent artist on Witchblade for Top Cow Comics, with a unique painted art style courtesy of that formal art education that he and Linda received growing up. However, he was getting pretty damn burnt out, so just for fun, Stjepan made an alternate account on DeviantArt and started posting pinups of a couple involved in BDSM, which started getting a ton of attention. Well, one day, a commenter asked, how did these two meet? And this got Stjepan inspired, telling their stories in a series of strips that would become his magnum opus, Sunstone. This series focuses on multiple couples within the BDSM community, but more than anything, it is a comedic slice-of-life comic that leans into just how inherently silly the kink is.
That's the fun thing about Sunstone, especially the way that the book is structured and the way that things progress through the volumes. You get a bigger and better insight into this whole scene, just the sheer kayfabe of it all, just the sheer pretense. You realize that the whole thing is basically nothing more than a bunch of sexual LARPers working really, really hard for their orgasms. And you know what? Valid. We all need a hobby, I guess.
To quote the top comment of my last Spicy Comics video, BDSM is just dungeons without the dragons. But even though it's a silly book that, be warned, is filled with some very millennial-ass humor, Sunstone shines by highlighting that the kink is just a single aspect of the characters' lives. Stjepan's characters feel like real people with real emotions, and even though this comic is literally about a fetish, it doesn't feel fetishized. What really sells the comic is that Sunstone manages to juggle its tones extremely well. You'll be laughing at a safe word joke, then admiring a sex scene, and then get sucker punched with a meditation on love, jealousy, trauma, and self-worth on the next one. Like, holy shit, there is an amazing scene about how love is like the Japanese art of kintsugi. In a relationship, you have to let something slide, and you fill in any of the cracks that might appear in its foundation, but you have to actually value and celebrate the history of the relationship and all the work that you've put into it, because if you don't, then that gold is little more than a shiny cover-up, and before you know it, the cracks are completely out of control, and you'll look back wondering at how it ever got this bad. And goddamn is that heartbreakingly true. But at the same time, Sunstone is absurdly heartwarming, especially with the main couple, Allie and Lisa, growing from an awkward first hookup to a deep and passionate love, one that just has plenty of sex scenes that, while yes are explicit, they're nothing shocking or hardcore. If anything, most of the scenes are pinups showing off the gorgeously rendered gear and rope work, but them ending up together feels earned in the messy and imperfect way that most real relationships are. Something important though is that there is a real focus on safety in Sunstone, going into detail about safe practices and gear maintenance, while also exploring why folks are attracted to submission and dominance in the first place, and just how freeing it can be for some people. But to address the elephant in the room, I did get some comments on my last Spicy Comics video about how some folks felt uncomfortable about reading a book where the most prominent couple are lesbians that's written by a man. And when I brought this up to Stjepan, he had this to say.
Step 1, write them as people. That means flawed. That means fuck-ups like everybody else. My big rule about writing is never forget that everybody is a fuck-up. I don't like to say that word on a stream, but it's a very honest term that I use. You gotta let these characters be wrong. You gotta let these characters make a mess of things. You gotta let these characters be people. Make wrong decisions, miscommunicate. Just write them as anybody else. The rest... Find yourself a bunch of people who are very willing to share their experiences with you and just put the hands behind your back and listen, just kind of enjoy. So again, like I said, it's a whole lot of research, a whole lot of listening. It's very easy to kind of jump to a conclusion what these books are before reading them. And honestly, like a large number of my biggest fans are people who started with, I hate reading it because they heard, oh, this is going to be so good. And then they realize it's a book written and drawn by the dude who spent the last decade drawing Witchblade. Somehow I doubt it. But then, they open it and very soon the frown turns into a smile, into laughter. And then you're like, oh, it's just a story about two idiots falling in love, and yeah.
Despite the fact that Sunstone was released 100% for free, and you can still read it for free to this day, it has gone on to become the best-selling series in Top Cow's history, even outselling Witchblade in the height of its popularity in the 90s. Not because it's edgy, but because it's honest. It's just a love story bound in leather, and it's wild that Top Cow, a company that became famous because of its 90s bad girl aesthetic, is now mostly known for this comic about healthy exploration in relationships. Now, moving on over to Bloodstained by Stjepan's wife Linda, it's not an erotic comic. Instead, it is a slow burn romance about an eccentric scientist and his assistant. This comic came about during a dark period in Linda's life, and while listening to a song by one of her favorite bands, Halloween, Stjepan was inspired to try and cheer her up by drawing a picture of the protagonist of one of their songs, Dr. Stein, and the young assistant that he was trying to clone. Linda loved this drawing, and it inspired her to start doodling the characters herself. And seeing just how much joy Stjepan was having with Sunstone, she was inspired to make a few strips here and there, just for herself. But when she finally showed them to her husband, he was extremely impressed, and he suggested that she make it into a DeviantArt webcomic as well. So she did, and it took off. The main character, Elliot Torres, is a klutz that can't hold down a job for the life of her, and she especially isn't able to get anything that utilizes her degree in chemistry. But that being said, she finds an extremely old wanted ad at her old college's notice board for an assistant position for one Dr. Vlad Stein that lives out of town in a dark and scary mansion. After a series of truly ridiculous events, Ellie ends up as Vlad's temporary assistant, having to prove herself to the absent-minded asshole genius before she could be hired on full-time. A lot of the comedy comes from Ellie's constant daydreaming, which allows for fun visuals and brief comedic moments to play out in her mind. Like, it is so small and dumb, but this little bit where Ellie visualizes Vlad as an RPG enemy with the boss typing genuinely had me laughing out loud. What can I say? I'm a simple man that likes little jokes, especially the recurring bit about how their personal chef can cook up literally any amazing meal that they could ever want, but he struggles to make a decent cup of coffee. This is going to sound weird, but there's not a whole lot to say about this comic, and that's a good thing, because legitimately, even though there's not a lot of plot, it is still captivating and engaging because the conversations have a rhythm to them that really flows. And on top of that, all the Sejic books get inventive with their word balloons, with slime oozing when they're uncomfortable, or bursting into flames when they're mad, or even blue screening when they're at a loss for words. I love this so much because word balloons are something that is exclusive to the medium of comic books, and by having them be an extension of the characters themselves, the Sejic make it special that you're reading a comic book, and that you're not experiencing the story in a different medium. With the pure expressiveness of the characters in Bloodstain, it's easy to forget that there's not much going on in the grand scheme of things. For context, within the first 2 volumes of this comic, Ellie only had 1 day as an assistant, and she doesn't actually get hired until the 3rd, but I genuinely didn't notice that because the comic is just that much fun to read. But at the same time, god damn does it piss me off, because just when the comic felt like it was taking an exciting step into its next arc, Linda put the series on hiatus to work on her other comic, Punderworld, which I will be getting to later on in this video. I'm gonna vent a little frustration because it's a slow burn series, and I love it so much, and I didn't realize how much I had read until I looked back wait, what do you mean that's the end of it? No, it's about to get to the next arc. I was so excited. And then you start making Punderworld. Damn it.
I know, right?
I want to read more. Something that I find funny is that I personally didn't see Bloodstain as a romantic story, but one of the Sejic crossover comics that's set in the future explicitly, and boy howdy do I mean explicitly, has Vlad and Ellie as a couple. As a fan, I'm excited to see how it plays out, but evidently there's going to be a lot more to go before that romance blossoms. So this new arc that you're going to be developing, this is going to be where the romance really starts to be kindled, or are we going to have to wait a little bit longer on that?
Oh, you're gonna have to wait until the end of... It's going to be even slower burn, because this is Bloodstain. Bloodstain is basically a story about 2 strangers meeting and working together as colleagues, and then becoming friends, and then perhaps becoming something more. That whole dynamic between them, and how they will handle the work relationship and how they're gonna handle their friendship.
Sunstone and Fine Print and After Hours are the kinky stuff, but I didn't realize that Bloodstain was just gonna be like one long edge session, just waiting for that payoff. Luckily for me, Linda is about to start the next volume of Bloodstain, and I am absolutely hyped to add it to my shelf, especially because it has the really clever bit where each volume is noted with a heartbeat instead of numbers. But while Linda was perfecting the art of the will they, won't they blue balling in Bloodstain, Stjepan decided to work on a high concept fantasy series that has the same horny yet heartful approach that made Sunstone so great. It's Fine Print. Essentially, a woman wants to deal with heartbreak, so she nearly causes an apocalypse. That is one hell of an elevator pitch. You see, succubi and cupids are both descendants of Eros, the Greek god of love and sex, and they sustain themselves on a substance called ambrosia, which was historically provided through worship and sacrifice. But as humans lost faith in the gods, these beings must come to Earth and make contracts with folks in order to generate a fresh supply. The cast of this comic is massive, but the main character is Lauren, an international supermodel with a whole bunch of self-destructive traits who has hit rock bottom and is constantly bringing down everyone in her orbit to the same level. While searching for an outlet to make her pain and regrets disappear, Lauren meets a succubus and discovers that banging her temporarily made those feelings go away. And so, desperate to make that emotional numbness permanent, Lauren leaps at the opportunity to sign the fine print. The only problem, though, is that her contract was assigned to 2 cubi at once, which leads to an interdimensional scandal that could destroy the entire world. Another character rising to prominence is Rachel, an asexual woman that gets assigned a contract by mistake, and she ends up keeping one of the most important incubi stuck in what seems to be an impossible mission. But they end up becoming great friends in the process, and he becomes a great source of inspiration for her fantasy books that she writes.
Rachel and Kel are going to be a very, very, very fun couple to write about, because like one of the first things that I never wanted to do is to be a story about fixing the ace.
Yeah, could be problematic.
Exactly. It's mostly because it's like there's nothing wrong with her. She just, that's not in her portfolio, you know? Fine Print is a story with like more characters than the X-Men. But it's a very tightly woven story that the more it progresses, the more you realize how tightly knit everything is and how you're watching something form into a very big picture, into this sort of a tapestry that collides in something spectacular by the end.
But I absolutely love the forbidden dynamic of Lilia and Eureka. So like, Cubi and Cupids are technically the same species, with one being driven by love and the other lust. A Cupid's arrow and a Cubi's tail are able to induce a drug-like high, so they are forbidden in partaking in one another, because if they're getting addicted to love and lust, then they aren't doing their job in making contracts with humans to create ambrosia. But also, if love or lust overtakes one another's heart, then they can convert, which reads like an interesting trans allegory, which is wild because their species is already gender fluid, being able to easily transform into whatever they need to satisfy desire.
The very concept of desire has been stripped down and simplified for the sake of this effectively capitalism of divine essence that they can then peddle with other gods. But desire is so much more. Desire is one of the essential driving forces of life. And as the story progresses, let me put it to you like this. This ain't a sex book. It's going to be a far, 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 far deeper read than anybody expected it to be by the end. And this is one of those books that I'm very, very much looking forward to finishing.
Fine Print is an extremely interesting series that is so much more than the fantasy sex book that it presents itself as, with so many moving pieces and intrigue that I don't feel like I'm going to truly appreciate it until the comic is totally done and I can read it all over again. But I also can't stress it enough, Fine Print is hilarious.
Lelia talking shit? I am shocked and appalled. In fact, you should come on my chest real quick so I can have a pearl necklace to clutch.
Yes, this is a shared universe because characters can appear in multiple books, but I think the real connective tissue between Stjepan and Linda's work is that they have the exact same sense of humor, and you can tell that these two have been together for a long time and are vibrating on the same wavelength.
Oh yeah, we
are on the same wavelength and we are constantly together.
The sheer amount of hours we spend in local coffee places just taking up space and laughing like idiots is just it's horrifying.
Our favorite time.
But to truly understand the origins of this world, we can take a look at Linda's comic Punderworld, with the romance of Hades and Persephone. Originally starting off as a story about Artemis and Orion, Linda Sejic started drawing more gods, but when she got to Hades and Persephone, they came out looking like Ellie and Vlad from Bloodstain, and they ended up becoming the new focus of the comic. And look, I'm gonna be real with you, this myth has been adapted so many times already, but I love just how gentle Punderworld is. Like, this comic is downright adorable, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying some cute shit every now and then. Hades doesn't involve himself with the affairs of the gods. Emphasis on affairs because he has never been a fan of just how promiscuous his dude bro brother Zeus is. But Hades has had his eyes on Persephone for centuries and was unable to work up the courage to approach her. Jesus Christ, 2 centuries? And here I thought Bloodstain was a slow burn. Persephone feels the exact same way, harboring a crush on the god of the dead since she first laid eyes on him, but her mother, Demeter, thinks that the two of them are too good for the rest of the divine, and sequester themselves away, focusing on letting plants bloom in the eternal summer on Earth, with no time for fun or leisure. Persephone is so caught off from the rest of the gods that she didn't even know that it was Hades she was crushing on, as when they first met, with him coming to pick up an order of ambrosia because the normal courier was busy, her mom waved him off, claiming that he is a lesser god that wasn't worth their time. But because there's something wrong happening with the newly deceased, where they're unable to remember their cause of death, the bureaucracy of the underworld was completely clogged up. So Hades goes to a party on Olympus to investigate, but he's manipulated by Zeus into getting drunk and spilling the details on his crush. But Zeus is constantly suggesting that he needs to turn into an animal to seduce her. He's got to turn into a bee and give her the stinger. Meanwhile, Persephone finally works up the courage to leave home and live her own life outside of her mother's shadow, resulting into her bumping into Hades, who, thanks to some liquid courage, decided that he was going to ask for her hand in marriage, which starts the chain of events of their romance, and ends up getting Persephone trapped in the underworld with Hades, who is attempting to return her back to Earth. As a life goddess, you would think that Persephone would be the exact opposite of Hades, but they hit it off instantly, and it is endearing to see just how much they are so obviously into each other, even if she's worried that their roles in life wouldn't make them a good pair. But although Hades assures her that she is more than enough for him, the mere act of Persephone being in the underworld causes the Earth to change, and to make things worse, she is physically incapable of passing through the barrier between the realms. Naturally, this whole ordeal is massively shifting the balance of order in the world, with Hades putting his duties as the king of the dead aside to wholly dedicate his attention to getting Persephone home safely. Like I said, this is not a mind-blowing premise because we have seen this myth tackled so many times before, but that's okay. Punderworld is a comforting rom-com that is pure fun to read, with just enough intrigue to keep readers hooked. although this comic is still ongoing and I don't have a definitive answer for how it's going to end, I would probably hazard a guess that it ends the same way as the actual myth. But I guess that's still a mystery to some people, because somehow there are some folks that have never encountered this myth. I know this is completely off topic, but I went and saw a production of Hadestown last year, and when Orpheus looked back at Eurydice, the entire theater went quiet, except for one guy that let out an audible, "Oh no." So yeah, I guess even some of these stories can be spoiled. The last book on this list is Crimson After Hours, a comic that brings together the characters of Sunstone, Bloodstain, and a couple from Fine Print in a game of truth or dare that's set inside of the bondage club featured in Sunstone, and it gets more and more wild as the night goes on. Now, this book is absolutely the most explicit comic that I'm going to feature in this video, because remember how I said earlier that Sunstone's sex scenes are mostly a series of pinups? After Hours is straight up porn. A really funny porn with great character moments, sure, but it's not much of a story. To put this as nicely but bluntly as possible, After Hours is the comic that people who haven't read Sunstone assume that it is. It's a plotless, in-your-face sex comic, but it's not really what I'm personally looking to read. Now, don't get me wrong, I still thoroughly enjoyed this book because it is a ton of fun to see these characters that I know and love all hanging out together and shooting the shit, but I don't know if it's going to have much appeal to folks that aren't already invested in the perverse. I do find it wild, though, that After Hours takes place the furthest in the timeline, so like I mentioned earlier, not only are Ellie and Vlad a couple, but they're banging in the bathroom here. I'm not against it, but it is definitely a different vibe than Bloodstain with all of its silly daydreams that's filled with video game references. But I will say it is funny, though, that one of the sex scenes gets retold as a pirate story where Ellie is a mermaid that gets caught in a fishnet, which then causes her to spontaneously grow legs that are adorned with sexy fishnet stockings. It's still absolutely the same character, it's just a very different vibe, because that whole will they won't they dynamic, they totally did. And you're going to see it a lot in this book. But yeah, the works of Stjepan and Linda are some of the best non-superhero comics that I have read in a good while, and you can read all of them 100% for free right now online. I've got links in the description as well as a link to my full interview with them. And if you want to see more spicy comics, then I have an entire video all about that, featuring Sunstone and Fine Print. Also, it is 100% viewable for free without a pledge on my Patreon, just like this video. But yeah. I think I'm losing my voice in the middle of recording this, so I am going to stop now. I hope you learned at least a little something new, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.